Welcome to In Conversation With, a Hollywood Reporter podcast produced in partnership with Apple TV+. In each episode, we sit down with the creators and stars of some of TV's most compelling shows and hear more about what went into bringing these stories to life. I'm Michael O'Connell, senior writer at The Hollywood Reporter, and for this episode, I'd love to welcome Gugu Mbatha-Raw, one of the stars of Morning Show, in which she plays Hannah, a booker on the titular talk show, harboring a devastating secret that's slowly revealed over the course of the first season. A celebrated and classically trained actress, Gugu is also known for starring in films such as Belle and Beyond the Lights, and what's probably the most universally adored episode of Black Mirror, the Emmy-winning San Junipero. Gugu Mbatha-Raw, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
I think we should start with Morning Show. Few series have been the subject of more attention before a single word was written, a single scene filmed. At what point in the process did you come on board?
You know, I knew that Jennifer Aniston and Reese Witherspoon and Steve Carell were cast. So I think maybe also Billy Crudup was cast at the point that I was sort of, first reading the script. But it was around October 2018. Oh my God, is that what it was? I basically got sent two scripts from my agents, and it was a straight offer for the role of Hannah. And I was so curious because obviously knowing that incredible cast, I knew that it was going to be a quality project. And I was also so excited because of Apple TV+. I just, launching and a whole new kind of streaming service. I thought that could be exciting to be part of the gestation of that. And then I read the scripts, and obviously Hannah is really not featured so heavily in the first two episodes. So I got on the phone with Mimi Leader and Kerry Erin, our showrunner and main director. And they basically pitched me, the whole of Hannah's arc across the season on the phone. And it just gave me chills. I just thought it was such a powerful storyline. And, as well as the writing of the show being so witty and smart and sort of muscular. And I just thought it was so topical and such a great project to get into.
It is so funny because the first few episodes, obviously a very recognizable actress in this part that you don't really see where it's going and how it's going to fit into the bigger story. What did you think of reading those first two scripts? And were you surprised by the backstory of what Hannah's significance to the larger story was going to be and it be revealed later in the season?
Yeah, I mean, I loved the writing, and I think that was, a huge draw. Kerry Erin and the whole writing team just made it feel, these characters were just sort of so almost larger than life, the adrenalized world that they're in. And, especially, I think everybody loves to see a bit of behind the scenes of what it's really like and what these personalities are really like. So that I really, really, loved the quality of the writing from the outset. And then really, as I say, Kerry and Mimi really did tell me exactly what Hannah's journey was going to be. So I knew from the outset everything, really, and that was more of an appeal as well because, I felt like there was definitely a sense of completion to her story. And, it just felt really like it would have such a powerful impact. And I loved the idea of it potentially generating conversations around the issues of the show, from sexual assault and power dynamics in the workplace to, suicide and, female friendships and female ambition, really, and the cost of that.
I mean, we've been leaning in the entertainment industry more and more into these stories of sexual assault and the aftermath. But what happens with this character takes it to a place that a lot of projects really haven't. It's incredibly tragic. And what sort of feedback did you get on how it played out, and how did that differ from maybe what you expected?
Yeah, it was really interesting, actually, in terms of people's response to Hannah. And I think especially the way the episodes initially rolled out, in that we had the first 3 episodes and then, initially they came out weekly, onto the streaming service. So, and then once they were all out, I think people's opinions of her shifted a little bit. But, initially, she sort of blends into the background. She's this workaholic career woman who's good at her job and ambitious and smart. And, she sort of makes the whole of the behind the scenes world of the morning show tick in terms of her research and in terms of, being the booker on the show. And I think it was fascinating, sort of around about, I don't know, episode 7, where things start to heat up for Hannah, and you get to see where, she somewhat is sort of spying on Claire and her dynamic with Claire and trying to understand what she is trying to protect Claire from. I think people maybe judged Hannah a little bit and thought she was a bit harsh as a friend, sort of giving Claire away to, the HR department and all of that. But I think certainly after episode 8, which is, the big episode that's a flashback where, my character and Steve Carell's character have that incident and the assault scene in Las Vegas, I think people obviously saw another layer to Hannah, and that she wasn't always this tough, sort of hard-bitten career woman, and that she came from a much more a place of vulnerability and what she went through. And I think that gave a whole perspective then to the rest of her choices in terms of, how conflicting it was for her to take that promotion, and also the cost of that, in terms of somewhat selling her soul, the morality of that. So the conversations have been really, really interesting. And, a lot of women have reached out to me on social media and expressed that they felt seen for the first time, in terms of the complexity of being in a moment like that. In terms of, the sexual assault scene and how that plays out, from many different perspectives.
That scene in episode 7 is just so deeply unsettling. And I'm curious, what kind of conversations did you and Steve have before filming it? And as we've gotten so much more sensitive about telling these stories and depicting them, do you feel that it was a conversation that may not have happened in a role that you took on 7-8 years ago?
Definitely. And I think, beyond Steve, obviously, definitely our director of that particular episode was the incredible Michelle McLaren, who is so thorough and so detailed and really, really great with actors. And, I think between talking with Michelle and talking with Mimi Leader, the main director on the show, and Kerry Erin, really getting that balance right. For the first time in my career, I worked with an intimacy coordinator, which definitely that role didn't even exist 7 or 8 years ago, let alone, 2 years ago, really. That's definitely been, a new role in the industry in the advent of Me Too. And so that was really interesting in terms of just the technical choreography of those kind of scenes. And I was very grateful to have that perspective and that extra support from, a neutral third party who was able to kind of look at both actors' comfort levels. And, that was her only interest, is beyond getting the shot, getting the story. I think that was definitely something that was new for me. And then really just, the nuances. And I think obviously Michelle was very clear that beyond anything graphic that we were shooting, that what was most important was what was going on with Hannah internally and emotionally, and those beats of, is it fight or flight? Essentially she is actually, the other instinct that we all have as human animals is the freeze response. And I think many people overlook the freeze response, and the paralysis of being in a moment like that. And, I think it's easy to judge and say, oh, why didn't you just, say no and get out there? And actually, I think for Hannah, in a situation with essentially one of her boss, somebody who's much more powerful than her and someone she idolizes as a mentor, it was very, very conflicting. So I think, I felt comfortable on a physical level. And obviously, Steve Carell is such a pro and really just was very conscious of the intimate and delicate nature of the story. So I think everybody was incredibly sensitive to how we were working on it.
I believe if it wasn't the same day, it was definitely the same week that Morning Show launched and Motherless Brooklyn came out. You're doing a press circuit. and you're plugging the show, but you really can't talk about the main, like the crux of your character and your purpose on the show. Yeah. How did you navigate that?
You are absolutely right. It was the same day. I remember etched into my memory, November 1st was like D-Day. Everything was just going on for me at that point in terms of promotion. And it was mad. I kind of couldn't believe it. But in a way, it's great to have that momentum, you know, because so often you work for months and sometimes years on these projects in isolation. And then when they, you know, finally come out in dribs or drabs, it's actually nice to have a sense of, you know, momentum, and also because they were such different projects. And in a way, it was great to be doing publicity for Motherless Brooklyn, which I could talk about a lot, knowing that I could sort of reference Morning Show, but I didn't have to go into too much detail because that would be to come, you know, a little later on in the season. So actually it was really nice. I could kill a few birds with one stone in terms of interviews and press. and as I say, it was really lovely for me that they were so contrasting as well.
How much do you think about the opportunities for social change and advocacy in the parts that you pick right now? Because it's so inherently part of your role in Morning Show. And you also recently did Misbehavior, a film in which you play the first woman of color crowned Miss World, that came out of the UK right before all the theaters shut down.
Oh, I know. Drama.
Yeah,
I know. I mean, it was a shame in a sense. And obviously, listen, it's, you know, a shame for the theatrical release of the movie, but obviously, you know, world pandemic obviously takes precedent. And I think what's been wonderful is that it will now obviously have a life on demand, and it's come out on demand in the UK at least, and is coming to the US this summer. So that's exciting. But in terms of, social advocacy, in terms of, you know, activism within the work, I think essentially that is of interest to me because, you know, we spend so long doing these projects and inhabiting these imaginary worlds. You want it to mean something, I think. And I think for me, it just makes it more exciting, you know, especially when you're talking about it, that you can engage with the culture. You know, I think for me always, you know, once you have the luxury as an actor of getting a job in the first place, which, let's be honest, is, you know, it's such a competitive business. And, you know, I think when I left drama school, you know, I was just happy to be working. And then, you know, once you are lucky enough to get enough under your belt that you can make some choices about the work that you do, I think for me, it's ultimately more fulfilling to be part of projects that create a conversation, and hopefully through that conversation they move the culture forward, or they shift people's thinking, or showing up a point of view from a world that we think we know, but a point of view we've never seen before. You know, like in Misbehavior, for example, the first woman of color to win Miss World. You know, you think, well, it's easy to be judgmental about Miss World, but actually in 1970, when the women's liberation movement were coming up, and actually when Grenada had never been represented as a country in the competition, you know, for a woman like Jennifer Hoston, who I play, it was a huge opportunity, you know, to expand her horizons and just to be seen, you know, in a competition like that was so rare. So, it definitely makes the work more satisfying for me when I know that there's you know, something to discuss.
I'm glad you brought up drama school, because you went to RADA, the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art, which has a reputation for both churning out incredible talent and also being quite demanding. And I'm very interested, what was your experience like there?
You know, I loved it. I have to say, I went when I was 18. I got in when I was 17, and I, you know, been living at home with my mum doing my A-levels and doing youth theatre. And so for me, going to RADA was, you know, a combination of leaving home. It was my university in a sense. I didn't go to university. I went straight to drama school, and a lot of people that I was there with had already, you know, either worked, you know, in the real world, or had, you know, come from Oxford or Cambridge or wherever they'd been and had much more life experience than I had. So for me, I was, you know, one of the youngsters, but in a way, I sort of felt a bit like a sponge in that I, you know, just took it all in. And you know, I was a bit of a nerd. I was always a hard worker, you know, at school and at drama school. And I loved it. I really did. I loved the experience. And I think, you know, it's mostly a classical theatre training. So for me, that was really, you know, exciting. And being in London, you know, walking distance from the West End Theatre, and the fact that you could, go and see plays at the Globe for £5 and stand and it was just such culturally, just being in London was just such a formative and very invigorating experience for me.
So you finish, how much are your aspirations in theater and some of these classic roles, of which you played several and got a lot of attention earlier in your career, and how much of your mind is looking ahead and thinking about going quote unquote Hollywood?
What, when I left drama school?
Yeah.
Or now? Oh, right. Yeah, no, I mean, I wasn't thinking quote unquote Hollywood at all. I think, the way that we were trained, and certainly from the point of view of the industry then, my aspirations were very much towards working at the National Theatre in London, or the Almeida, the Donmar, the Royal Court, those kind of highly esteemed independent London theatres. And Hollywood just felt faintly sort of ridiculously far away. And and sort of not really within reach in that sense. And, obviously there were people that I went to drama school with that went straight into films. But I think for me, I was really happy and thrilled to be working in theatre. And, it was theatre that led to television, and then television. Actually, it was theatre that led me to the US, to be honest with you, because it was a production of Hamlet that transferred to Broadway. And that was my first ever trip to America. So in a weird way, I've got Shakespeare, as I've got a lot to thank him for opening up, my career on this side of the pond.
You played Ophelia in Shakespeare?
Yeah.
You had a lot of success in your 20s, but I feel that the sort of international breakout moment for you, at least as an outsider, is that sort of 1-2 of Belle and Beyond the Lights. These two incredible movies, incredible performances, back to back. What was that 2-year experience like? And do you sort of look at that as the turning point in your career?
It's so interesting because I feel like there have been many turning points along the way, as I say, coming, first to New York with Hamlet and doing a pilot over here with J.J. Abrams 2 months later in L.A. was definitely a huge internal turning point. Undercovers, exactly. As short-lived as it was a massive experience for me personally, learning and living and working in LA. And certainly in terms of Belle and Beyond the Lights, I mean, I'd known about the story of Belle for about 7 years before we got to shoot it. And I met Gina Prince-Bythewood here before we did Belle. And we tried to get funding for Beyond the Lights, and a lot of people weren't interested, or they wanted, a different actress or a singer to play the part. And it was difficult initially with Gina to get funding. So we shot a teaser for Beyond the Lights, just like a sort of short film. And just when that was made, then I found out that Belle was actually going to go into production. So I started sort of the prep for Beyond the Lights, then went to London and did Belle. And it wasn't really until a year later, I remember I shot them both in September, October. And it was crazy because I did Belle, September, October 2012. Then the following September, I was shooting Beyond the Lights, but Belle was at the Toronto Film Festival. So one of my weekends off from shooting Beyond the Lights, I went to TIFF and, had the premiere of the film of Belle, and then came straight back literally the next week. And I was sort of hanging off the balcony, the big balcony scene that we have in the film, hanging off the balcony of the Sofitel Hotel in LA. I mean, it was a very surreal time, but amazing for me to have those, such different roles, so meaningful and, in many senses about identity in terms of women sort of finding their voice and finding their sense of self in a culture that isn't necessarily accustomed to them and, in their natural sense. Yeah, and obviously working with two hugely inspiring directors, Amara Sante and Gina Prince-Bythewood, in the space of a year. Before people were talking as much about the effort that the industry is making to empower and work with female directors. I mean, it was there, but working with them was just incredibly inspiring and very empowering.
You say that there have been multiple turning points in your career. I would love for you to describe this current phase of your career, especially as it relates to the roles that are coming your way.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because it's always, it's hard to look back when you're in it. But, what's been really interesting, and certainly, in this time of quarantine and having a bit of time to catch up and reflect on, the last year and the last couple of years. And certainly, when you take Motherless Brooklyn, Morning Show and Misbehavior, everything starting with M for some reason. I remember I had that for a second where I was like doing everything beginning with B, like Belle, Beyond the Lights, Black Mirror. But it's so weird how that happens. But yeah, I mean, for me, I don't know. I think the idea of, I hadn't worked in television for a long time before doing morning show, certainly a series. Black Mirror was obviously on Netflix, but it was just one episode, so it felt more like a film. I think, the industry's changed so much in terms of, the multiple streaming platforms that we now have, and what is a film and what is a TV series and how does the quality of them really differ. I don't think they do anymore, in terms of the choices. So, yeah, I mean, I think maybe, I'm excited because the things that are coming my way are, more complex. I think maybe certainly my team and people that know my work know that I gravitate to sort of more multi-dimensional roles, and I'm happy to say that those are coming my way more frequently now. But you never know. I mean, I've also just, signed up to work on Loki for Marvel, which is really exciting and something that is a totally different genre for me, so I'm always wanting to keep changing the genres because I think that keeps me interested and hopefully, stretches your muscles in different ways.
Were you supposed to be filming that right now?
Yeah. Yeah, I was in Atlanta at the beginning of lockdown. I mean, it was a crazy week because I'd just flown to London for the premiere of Misbehavior in London. And, obviously we knew about coronavirus at the time, but it wasn't seemingly in the media being taken quite as seriously at that point, but it was mounting. And then, the premiere was in London on the Monday. I flew back to Atlanta on the Tuesday, went back to work Wednesday, Thursday. And by the Friday, we were shut down for, a hiatus. So that week was such a big turning point in terms of the public perception of the virus, even though probably when I flew to London, it was probably still as bad, but there wasn't an awareness, or it wasn't being taken as seriously in the media at the time. So, yeah, it was a bit of a jolting week. I mean, gosh, jolting for everybody to stop work and just go into lockdown. It's, it takes a minute to get used to the shock of that, of just stopping. But, yeah, I'm excited to, and hopeful that we will get back to work, when it's safe to do so. And, get back to Atlanta.
Are you allowed to say anything at all about your role in Loki, or will Disney lawyers helicopter onto your property?
Pretty much. The Marvel police will probably come and kidnap me. No, I can't say anything.
You starred in I think probably the most beloved episode of Black Mirror, and if not the most beloved, definitely the most uplifting.
Oh, yeah, that's
maybe
for sure.
Only uplifting. How does that rank in terms of the things that people approach you about on the street? Like, what role do people talk to you about the most?
It's so interesting. It depends where I am and it depends who the person is. I mean, whenever I'm at JFK, anyone that works at JFK wants to talk to me about Beyond the Lights. That's it. I'll be in the Starbucks queue. I'll be going through the sort of security line and it's, I don't know why, some reason JFK is Beyond the Lights. I don't know. And then, when Morning Show first came out, I had a lot of people obviously approach me about that, or they weren't sure, they were like, are you in a morning show? I'm not sure. That's also another thing. I think sometimes people don't always, they know they recognize me from something, but they're not always 100% sure what. And then sometimes there's just people that are like, oh my God, I love Belle. Oh my God, I love, San Junipero. It's really lovely actually, because there's such a variety of things. And, I think they have different appeals and appeal to people of different experience and different demographics. So that's really nice for me actually, because it's always just a really varied group of people.
I think that Beyond the Lights is a really big plane watch for a lot of people.
Oh, yeah.
I think that might have something to do with the airport. It's a good, it's a good emotional in-flight film.
Yeah, exactly. And then again, something like that comes up again a lot around Valentine's Day, you know, when people are wanting to watch more romantic films. You know, and lots of people now increasingly are being able to see fast color, which had a very limited release, but it's now on lots of other streaming platforms. And you know, again, just Mother's Day just gone, you know, because that film, the themes of that film are so much about mothers and daughters and that dynamic. You know, there's been more conversations about fast color, and weirdly in this post-apocalyptic feeling land that we are in, you know, or have been in lockdown, dare I say it, the world of fast color, where I remember saying to Julia Hart, the director, I said, oh my God, the grocery store looks like the grocery store in fast color today, because, you know, when there was that panic buying and there's like no toilet paper on the shelves or just a few, you know, tins of whatever. We have a scene in fast color where, you know, in this sort of post-apocalyptic world of drought, that my character goes into a grocery store and it was literally like that, sort of naked shelves. And so it's definitely good quarantine viewing as well. At
least you were prepared. Morning show, second time you've been billed alongside Reese Witherspoon, who is a producer on the show and has sort of built this empire in the last couple of years. I'm wondering, like, looking at your own future, how interested are you in this sort of increasingly common idea of the multi-hyphenate, the actor producer, the actor writer, the actor director? How much do you think about that?
It's been very inspiring to me to see Reese, and, you know, certainly coming from Wrinkle in Time, you know, which we did with Ava DuVernay, and, you know, the incredible women on that film, you know, from Oprah to Mindy Kaling. I mean, it was just such an epic film of, you know, these female leaders in the industry, and that's been really inspiring to me. And seeing, you know, and talking to Reese and how enterprising she is. I mean, you know, at the moment I'm very much focused on the acting, and I think when it comes to having a clothing line or a book club, I'm not sure I'm there yet. But, you know, I do think that, you know, and certainly in terms of having a more producerial role in the work, you know, in the acting work, that's definitely really appealing to me. And again, you know, looking at people like Reese, like Ava DuVernay, you know, looking at how the production companies that they've built and how they, you know, make a point of celebrating female voices and diverse voices. And that's definitely, you know, something that I've been very inspired by.
Before I let you go, we're going to do a quick lightning round.
Uh-oh. Okay. Brace.
Are you ready? If you had to quarantine with anyone from the morning show cast or crew, who would it be and why?
It would have to be Belle Powley. I have to say, Belle Powley, who plays Claire Conway, is just, I mean, you know, we're such good mates in real life. I think as the fellow Brit, she would get my sense of humor. She always makes me laugh anyway. I think we used to carpool to work sometimes on the way to the morning show set. So, you know, we just make each other laugh, and she's such a joyful presence.
To end things on a positive note, what's one way that you would say your life has improved during this sort of strange stay-at-home time?
I've got more sleep, which has been really nice. I have also been a bit more experimental in terms of cooking. You know, I think I had my limited repertoire of things that I would make, and now I'm kind of trying out recipes and looking at things in the New York Times and trying to get inspiration from outside of my own cooking experience. I've also really enjoyed having a bit more time just to reflect, and I've taken up painting, actually, which was something that I used to do a lot when I was a teenager. And, you know, I always almost considered doing as a life choice instead of acting. But I think I chose acting because it was more collaborative, and actually, weirdly, obviously, now being in isolation, painting is something I can do on my own, but it's still creative and artistic. And I've really, really loved having that excuse to have reconnection with that creative outlet that I'd sort of left by the wayside. So watch out for my quarantine exhibition coming soon.
When we're allowed to go to galleries again.
Exactly. Oh my goodness.
Gugu Mbatha-Raw, thank you so much for joining me today. This has been lovely.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Be sure to check out Morning Show on Apple TV Plus and join us next week when we'll be speaking with talent from another Apple TV Plus series.